You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking at the moment. An Israeli airstrike in Beirut has killed a senior Hezbollah commander, fueling fears that Lebanon may soon be enveloped in a Middle East conflict. A days-long Israeli assault on the Lebanese group, part of the country's expanded war aims that has shifted military focus from Gaza to its northern border, has killed hundreds, including children. As Israel faces a critical juncture in its history with its war on two fronts with Hamas and Hezbollah, the country's envoy to India has said it has been attacked more than any other nation in modern times, and all its actions are driven by the objective of rooting out radicalism and establishing peace and stability. We have an exclusive interview lined up for you. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan again compares Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Hitler, this time doing it in his speech to the United Nations General Assembly. And Brian Ruth, a former construction worker, has now been charged with the attempted assassination of the former US President Donald Trump. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has been briefed by US intelligence officials on alleged threats from Iran to assassinate him, Trump's campaign has said. The US president declared in his final address to the UN General Assembly, he said that the US must not retreat from the world as Israel and Hezbollah militants in Lebanon edge towards all-out war, and Israel's bloody operation against Hamas in Gaza nears the one-year mark. China's central bank unleashed an unprecedented blitz of policy support for the economy as authorities made their boldest swing so far to hit this year's annual growth target of about 5% after a flurry of Wall Street banks downgraded their forecasts. Sri Lanka welcomed its 16th Prime Minister. Harini Amarasuriya became the first woman to hold the position since the year 2000. She spent her formative college years at Delhi University in the early 1990s. Many believe her appointment could further strengthen ties between India and Sri Lanka. Our big focus, an Israeli airstrike on Beirut killed a senior Hezbollah commander, fueling fears that Lebanon may soon be enveloped in a metastasizing Middle East conflict. In fact, a days-long Israeli assault on the Lebanese group, part of the country's expanded war aims that has shifted military focus from Gaza to its northern border, has killed hundreds, including children. And while analysts say the aerial offensive has degraded Hezbollah's capabilities, many have nevertheless noted its massive weapons arsenal and preparations for a ground war in Lebanon. If such an Israeli operation takes place, it's not going to be a walk in the park, as one retired Israeli military official put it. Here are the finer details for you.
First, the pager blast, then walkie-talkie explosions, and now multiple aerial strikes by Israel into Lebanon. The strikes have killed hundreds of people and left several others injured. Israel has called them preemptive strikes to weaken Hezbollah.
למי שעדיין לא הבין, אני רוצה להעביר את מדיניות ישראל. אנחנו לא מחכים לאיום, אנחנו מקדימים אותו. בכל מקום, בכל זירה, בכל עת. אנחנו מחסלים בכירים, מחסלים מחבלים, מחסלים טילים, ועוד ידנו נטויה.
Israel claims they are targeting Hezbollah commanders and fighters. But it's been a nightmare for civilians of Lebanon who are now struggling with displacement, in a way mirroring what residents in Gaza are going through.
تعذبنا كثير على الترقان، لا قدرنا وصلنا. في ناس قرايبين من اخواتي واخوات مرتي ناموا على الشوارع بعدنا لحد هلا مش ملاقيين مأوى. يعني المدارس سكرت مثل منك شايف يعني.
Lebanon is located on the northern border of Israel, and both sides have been targeting civilian areas. Israeli cities of Afula, Haifa, Kiryat Shmona have been under attack. While cities of Baalbek, Beirut and others are under intense aerial attack from Israel. Israel yet again claims that Hezbollah is solely responsible for the situation in Lebanon, as it was hiding weapons and rocket launchers in residential areas.
We provided advance warning to civilians in specific villages in Lebanon where Hezbollah embedded its military assets and weapons and warned them to move out of harm's way. However, even as we called on civilians to move away from danger, we saw that Hezbollah operatives were doing the opposite and acted to prevent civilian moving safety.
Meanwhile, Iran has also hinted at retaliation against Israel.
As world leaders have gathered for UNGA in United States, all eyes will be whether these leaders manage to achieve a ceasefire deal for what is happening in the Middle East and whether they will be able to restore normalcy in a region which has been on boil for the last 1 year. In Delhi, Mohammad Ghazali for NDTV.
My colleague Mohammad Ghazali also joins us live for a quick update at the moment. Ghazali, Israeli strikes on Lebanon continue as Iran says Hezbollah cannot stand alone.
Yeah, the Israeli strike continue, and many of the Israeli soldiers or officers, senior commanding officers, have hinted that perhaps we should not give any space and time for Hezbollah to regather or regroup its commanders. After the pager blast, all the explosions in the walkie-talkie and other electronic devices killed hundreds of the Hezbollah commanders, as Israel claims, and then aerial strikes which have been going on in Lebanon for the last 3 days. That has also weakened Hezbollah. But those who have seen Hezbollah reacting against Israel for years now hint that perhaps Hezbollah still has enough arms and ammunition as well as personnel on the ground that it can still attack on Israel. And that's quite evident that even yesterday, it was not just Israel which was sort of carrying out aerial strikes in Lebanon, but Hezbollah was still firing rockets in civilian areas of Israel. And thanks to the Iron Dome, that the damage has been inflicted, but no civilian casualty or injuries have been reported. But enough rockets, pile of ammunition is with Hezbollah that it still continues to attack Israel. Now, the major challenge, and I would correct myself, that this challenge is now becoming a major failure for U.S. administration, because the Biden administration for the last 1 year has been saying that perhaps it is working tirelessly to achieve a ceasefire deal and to contain this conflict in the Middle East from spilling over to other regions. But what we have seen in the last 1 year is that first it was militias from Iraq, then Houthis from Yemen, and Hezbollah continues to attack. Now Israel has opened another front with Hezbollah on the northern border, and perhaps that is not going to be anyone in the Middle East region until this entire situation is brought in control.
As always, Ghazali, thanks so much for joining us with that update. We will, of course, revert to you for a regular update. As Israel faces a critical juncture in its history with its war on two fronts, with Hamas and Hezbollah, the country's envoy to India has said it has been attacked more than any other nation in modern times, and all its actions are actually driven by the objective of rooting out radicalism and establishing peace and stability. Listen in.
Reuven Azar is Ambassador of Israel to India. Thank you so much for taking time out and coming to NDTV studio. Ambassador Azar, after 500 lives were lost in Lebanon, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had reached out to the Lebanese people, and he had said that they should not become human shields for the Hezbollah. But the question is, the number of civilian casualties is very high, both in Gaza and in Lebanon. Why are they becoming collateral in this prolonged war?
Well, Maria, thank you for this interview. What is happening in Lebanon right now is that in the last 48 hours, we targeted more than 1,700 military targets, and most of them were embedded inside the homes of civilians in southern Lebanon. What Hezbollah has done in the last few years is a double war crime. They have been embedding their missiles inside the homes of people to conceal them from Israel, and they have been firing indiscriminately at civilians in northern Israel from these installations. So what Israel had to do is to take out, we have gathered meticulously, intelligence about dislocations in the last few years. And fortunately, we've been able to target and to destroy dozens thousands of missiles that were in those areas. Now, the families that were living there are some of them that didn't evacuate on time, despite the fact that we called them by phone, we intercepted their radio communications, we tried in any way possible to take them out of harm's way. Despite that fact, yes, there were some civilians that were killed as well.
You know, we have seen pagers and other devices explode in Lebanon, and Hezbollah has blamed Israel for it. You know, this is a new age digital warfare that we are seeing play out. What exactly is your reading of the situation?
Well, you know, in the past there used to be either wars between conventional armies or fights against terrorism. I think that today war has kind of a hybrid nature. We've seen it in Israel because we have been attacked like no other country in the history of modern times. And we have been attacked not only with rockets and missiles, but also with cyber attacks. We've been attacked from the air, from the sea, from the land, from tunnels, from very different ways. And at the end of the day, you have to create a situation in which you can not only defend yourself, but also be able to surprise your enemy. So, you know, I won't go into details of what Israel is doing or is not doing, but the bottom line is that if we want to achieve stability, we have to show to these terrorists that are using unconventional and unethical and immoral ways of fighting that we can also surprise them.
Meanwhile, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has compared the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Nazi dictator Hitler on Tuesday, urging that he be stopped. Erdogan said during his speech at the 79th United Nations General Assembly in New York, just as Hitler was stopped by the Alliance of Humanity 70 years ago, Netanyahu and his murder network must also be stopped by the Alliance of Humanity. In fact, the Turkish president criticized the United Nations for failing to fulfill its original mission and instead becoming, and I quote, a dysfunctional structure. In other news, US President Joe Biden used his final United Nations speech to defend his foreign policy achievements and also urged people not to grow weary in the face of global conflict. He stressed the world was at an inflection point in our history, with the Gaza war expanding across the Middle East, a humanitarian disaster unfolding in Sudan, and Ukraine still embroiled in what he called Putin's war, and no end in sight for any of these crises. But as many geopolitical analysts argue, alongside the tumultuous US withdrawal from Afghanistan, and with Israel now focusing military efforts on Lebanon, the war in Gaza looks set to be remembered as the final nail in the coffin for Joe Biden's foreign policy legacy. My colleague Mitch McCann joins us with a roundup of the key takeaways.
Since October 7, we've also been determined to prevent a wider war that engulfs the entire region. Hezbollah, unprovoked, joined the October 7th attack, launching rockets into Israel. Almost a year later, too many on each side of the Israeli-Lebanon border remain displaced. A full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security to allow the residents from both countries to return to their homes and the border safely. And that's what we're working tirelessly to achieve.
Joe Biden used his final opportunity to speak to the General Assembly to reflect on his administration's foreign policy successes, which he said included rebuilding Western alliances to support Ukraine. But Biden also sent a warning to world leaders not to waste time in acting to solve some of the planet's biggest crises at the moment. His speech came amid escalating tensions in the Middle East, following Israeli strikes on targets within Lebanon. And speaking of that situation, Biden said we've also been determined to prevent a wider war that engulfs the entire region. And he added that a full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Amid wars in the Middle East, Ukraine and in Sudan, the 81-year-old president sought to reassure leaders that there is still hope for the future. Biden recounted arriving at the US Senate in 1972, at a time when he said the country was both angry and divided over the war in Vietnam. The president pointed out that the US and Vietnam are now partners and friends, to show, in his words, that things can get better. Mitch McCann, NDTV, at the United Nations in New York.
With that, let's turn our attention now to China. Well, China has unleashed a swath of stimulus measures, including cuts to its benchmark interest rate, as Beijing battles a slowdown in the world's second largest economy. In a rare public briefing, the People's Bank of China also announced government funding to boost the stock market and aid share buybacks, as well as more support for the stricken property sector. Adopting a suite of measures to reduce borrowing costs, the People's Bank of China cut interest rates on existing mortgages by 0.5 percentage points and also supported new lending by reducing the level of reserve banks must set aside before making loans. But business activity in China is slowing down, and citizens are wondering whether, as promised by those in power, tomorrow really will be better than yesterday. But the authorities, it seems, are not about to let doubts creep in, publicly at least, because of the practice of censorship there. But joining us for a quick comment at the moment, Mohan Guruswamy. Thank you so much, sir, for making time for us. Many economists blame the crisis in China on Xi Jinping's effort to boost the state sector, rein in what he considers capitalistic excess, and protect China against perceived foreign threats. Can you relate to this perspective, sir? What's your take?
The understanding is that China's problem is, one is too much of production. Its production capacity is huge and is overextended now. The world doesn't have enough demand. Chinese themselves are not consuming their goods. There's not enough demand in China, so producer prices are deflating. And they've already been deflating now for 8 months. Besides this, they have a huge problem with liquidity. They've got so much of money in the market with earlier pump priming that there's a kind of overheating of the economy on one side, which is not, even that is not, availability of cash is not making the Chinese consume more. The Chinese citizen is so uncertain about the future that he's just not buying. If you bought a house, then you're stuck with it, as you could be in Shanghai or Nanjing or any other place, and you can't even sell it, then you're not going to buy another house. That's the problem in China. People are just not consuming, they're saving, thinking that the rainy day is coming. And the rainy day is being postponed for a few months at a time, but it is going to come. Because you simply, meanwhile the world, which consumes Chinese goods, has also tightened up. US has just put huge duties, India has got duties, Brazil has got duties, Mexico's put duties, Europe is putting duties. Some countries, the duties are as high as 200%. The EV cars, which are coming to India in such large numbers, how long will they come? There's already a demand within the industry. Indian producers are saying, you've got to get duties up because Chinese exports are subsidized. So if the world tightens upon China, the economy will get even worse. And unless Chinese citizens start consuming more, it is going to slow down. And Chinese citizen has not shown any sign of consuming more or wanting to consume more. Besides, China has also entered a demographic trap where there are more old people now than young people.
Yes.
And as you know, old people don't consume. They save for hoping, thinking, preparing for a worse day. And young people are just not buying either. So China is in a double whammy.
In fact, some analysts remain wary that China's stimulus measures won't actually have drastic enough impacts to actually rescue the country from its economic woes. But thank you so much, sir, for joining us on The World 24/7 and making time for us. With that, we're slipping into a very short break. News and updates continue in a moment right here on NDTV 24/7. Welcome back. Ryan Ruth, the gunman accused of planning to kill Donald Trump at his Florida golf course, was indicted on 3 additional counts, including attempted assassination of a major presidential candidate. He has already been charged with 2 gun crimes in relation to this assassination incident. A quick update from Sri Lanka now. In one of the most Significant moves as Sri Lanka's newly elected president, leftist leader Anura Kumara Dissanayake has actually dissolved the country's parliament and called for snap polls within 1 month. The aim behind the move is for the new leader to follow up on his electoral promise of bringing change in Sri Lanka's decades-old rule by political families. Thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.